Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are plunging into a stack of sources, specifically pulling out some really fascinating insights from excerpts of How to Write Like Tolstoy, a journey into the minds of our greatest writers.
Yeah, and our goal here is, to go beyond just the surface, to really dig into the craft, the secrets, and maybe some surprising techniques that these great authors use to build those compelling worlds and characters that, well, they stick with you long after you turn the last page.
Right. And this isn't just a straightforward how-to manual, though it definitely offers practical guidance. It feels more like an exploration, doesn't it? How these literary giants made their creative choices sometimes, hitting it out of the park.
And sometimes maybe missing the mark a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. The book really reflects a lifetime of reading and the author's own teaching experience, too. It gets particularly swept up, I think, in how certain novelists wrestled with specific challenges.
Like what kind of challenges?
Well, Dickens and Eliot navigating tricky endings, Faulkner really pushing boundaries with narrators, or someone like Elmore Leonard just perfecting dialogue, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And it kicks off with this wonderful idea, writing itself as a form of magic. Like a magician performing a seemingly impossible trick. Nabokov, he talked about the flawless magic of Tolstoy's style. But the real marvel, the book suggests, is that secret in the bottle, that hidden layer of craft that creates the amazing effect.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Maybe starting with what often feels like the heart of any story, the characters. How do writers actually bring these people to life, make them feel so real they stay with us? It's got to be more than just a name, right? It's backstory, those defining details.
Oh, absolutely. It's a complex process, and sometimes they can feel almost too real, even for the writer. I was really struck by that story about Mark Twain. Apparently, he agonized for months over a character he ended up cutting from both Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn. This boy who played with matches died in prison somewhere. Twain felt actual guilt over this fictional person.
Wow, that's wild. It makes you think about that whole idea. You hear it from so many writers, like Jane Austen all the way up to Jane Smiley, that characters can sometimes just take over a story, almost like they have a mind of their own.
Yeah, but what's really interesting is contrasting that with someone like Nabokov. He flatly denied it, said his characters had no independent life. They just obeyed his every command.
Huh. Quite the opposite view.
Exactly. And Jonathan Franzen adds another layer, suggesting that maybe, just maybe, claiming characters take over might sometimes be a bit of, well, authorial self-aggrandizement.
Or ducking responsibility.
Or maybe even a way for the writer to avoid responsibility. Yeah, like
Yeah.
saying, oh, the character made me write that.
So, okay, when you're building these characters, how do you handle their history, their backstory?
The book has a great analogy. Think of backstory like ammunition.
Ammunition.
Yeah. You have it ready, you know what it is, but you only fire it off when you actually need it in the story itself, not before.
Got it. And characters aren't static, right? They develop. Or is that too simple?
Well, even the idea of character development has shifted over time. Back in the 19th century, George Eliot, talking about Lydgate in Middlemarch, really saw character as a process in an unfolding. That was central.
But that changed.
It did. By the 20th century, you had writers like Joyce, Woolf, Brecht, Beckett challenging that. They felt human beings are much less consistent. For them, character wasn't this unified thing, and that traditional development felt more like an illusion, a chimera.
So what do modern writers do?
Many find that very slight shifts in personality are actually much more true to life and more effective. Oscar Wilde had that great line, didn't he? Truth can simply be one's latest mood.
Huh, right. And the question everyone always asks, are these characters based on real people?
Often, yeah, elements are definitely drawn from life. Tolstoy apparently said he never invented a single person, that everyone in War and Peace was based on someone he knew.
Really? Everyone?
That's what he claimed. And Fitzgerald certainly didn't hide that Daisy and Jordan and Gatsby had real-life inspirations.
But it's not just like photocopying someone you know.
Oh, definitely not. And some authors really pushed back against that idea. Nabokov emphasized imagination, creating these evolving serial selves. John Cheever insisted fiction is not crypto-autobiography.
Right.
The book stresses that it actually takes serious work to extract what's useful and valuable from real life for fiction. It mentions Gail Godwin's own struggles with that. It's not easy.
So beyond the big picture stuff, How do you make them feel concrete, vivid on the page? It seems like the little details must be crucial.
Absolutely vital. Specific details, mannerisms, those distinguishing features. There's that great example of Kipling's Click Vickery.
Quick victory.
Yeah, a character named entirely for the sound of his ill-fitting false teeth,
Laughs. Okay, that's memorable.
isn't it? And the editor, Maxwell Perkins, talked about how J.M. Barrie made Thomas Carlyle feel incredibly real just by describing his broad-brimmed hat and his thick walking stick. Simple things.
Like a perfect little sketch.
Exactly. The book compares it to the cinema's master shot
Hmm.
at establishing image, Dostoevsky. He's credited with basically inventing the literary close-up
How so?
by showing, say, a flicker of a brilliantly enlarged eyelid. Tiny detail, but it hints at huge movements of the soul underneath.
You know, hearing that described makes me think of visual art, like how an artist can capture a whole person with just a few lines. That drawing, Hortense Fouquet's Sewing by Cezanne.
Oh, yeah, good example.
It's a character study in itself, isn't it? Just through the pose, the details. It's
Oh.
like what writers do with description.
Finding that single telling detail.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's key to making a character feel truly present for the reader.
Okay, so moving on from who the story is about, let's think about who's actually telling it and how close we, the readers, feel to the action. This whole area of narrative perspective and distance. How do authors control what we see?
Well, how you start is a huge decision, beginning with I. It can be incredibly powerful, really intimate.
But risky.
Yeah, as Proust discovered, it can be a real misfortune if readers just assume it's straight autobiography. Using a fictitious I, though, can create this fascinating dialogue with the reader right from the start.
And then there are those really startling openings. Bang!
Right, some novels by Tom Robbins or Ayn Banks hit you with a genuinely shocking line immediately. The book calls this grandstanding, the writer as show-off.
And the danger is?
Anticlimax, basically.
Yeah.
Where do you go after that huge opening shock? Contrast that with a wonderfully unusual start, like Thomas Mann's Buddenbrooks.
Yeah.
And what comes next just pulls you right in.
For those classic grand declarations.
Dickens, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. The ultimate example. The philosopher Schlegel called these openings porcupines, suggesting they should stand alone, bristling with meaning.
But they can backfire.
They can risk sounding overly portentous, yeah?
Mm.
The book notes some criticism of the openings of Eliot's Middlemarch or Lawrence's Lady Chatterley's Lover on those grounds.
And we've definitely seen the novel itself evolve over time, haven't we, in terms of its focus?
Oh, significantly. It moved much more from depicting primarily the outer life to really exploring the inner life. Psychology's rise definitely reinforced that shift.
Which is why character often feels so central now.
Exactly. We remember those famous characters, Heathcliff, Bovary, Gatsby, so vividly because we feel like we've gotten inside their heads, seen the world through their eyes, at least partly.
And authors have really sophisticated ways of showing his character, not just listing traits.
For sure. Think of Homer showing Helen's beauty. He doesn't describe her face.
Right, he describes the old men's reaction.
Exactly. The old man on the walls of Troy, seeing her, murmuring about her beauty despite the war she caused. It's brilliant showing impact, not just describing features. Janet Malcolm, the critic, even called Tolstoy a master of manipulative techniques in how subtly he guides our perception of characters.
Manipulative techniques. That leads right into narrative distance, doesn't it? That control over how far away or close the author puts us.
It's a crucial balancing act. You often need both a broad overview, the big picture, and the close, intimate perspective. The book uses a great example from War and Peace.
How does Tolstoy handle it there?
He might describe a general from a distance first, part of the larger battle scene, before zooming in closer to the immediate action, the dialogue, the personal experience.
It really does sound like choosing the camera angle in a film.
Precisely. And that sense of distance or intimacy is tied directly to what the author wants to achieve. Sometimes, you have to sacrifice a bit of intimacy for clarity, especially in a novel with the huge scope of War and Peace. You need that wider view.
And sometimes it feels like the story is just happening. There's no obvious narrator speaking to us.
Right. That's often described as using a center of consciousness or maybe a disembodied voice. It implies there's an authorial presence filtering the story, but it's not an explicit I.
So the key question isn't just first or third person.
Maybe not. Perhaps the more important decision is, how close do you want that camera to be? That feeling of closeness or distance can shape the reader's experience profoundly.
Okay, let's switch to something that immediately injects life into a story. Dialogue. Why is it so incredibly vital in fiction? It seems obvious, but
Well, it does so much heavy lifting. It makes the story feel alive, immediate, less like something being recounted from afar. It's a primary way to convey character, show us who they are.
right, not just tell us.
Exactly. It dramatizes events, adds immediacy, helps set the scene, establishes rhythm and tone, gives viewpoint. I mean, the list goes on. Builds suspense, controls pacing.
And it makes the reader work a bit too.
Definitely. The reader has to interpret, figure out the subtext. It requires participation.
And Jane Austen is always the prime example for mastering this, right?
Oh, absolutely. Azar Nafisi, in Reading Lolita in Tehran, talks about how central dialogue is in Pride and Prejudice. That constant back and forth, often internal dialogue between Elizabeth and Darcy is the engine of the novel. Her students in Iran really connected with that.
But, and this is key, fictional dialogue isn't just a recording of how people actually talk, is it?
Not at all. Real, natural speech involves so much more than just words. Oliver Sacks called it an uttering forth of our whole being. Plus, let's be honest, people often speak lazily, vaguely.
Full of ums and ahs and dead ends.
Exactly. As David Lodge pointed out, if you faithfully transcribed real conversation in fiction, it would often be rambling and pretty much unintelligible. Fictional dialogue is an artificial construct. It's designed for clarity, for impact, for moving the story forward.
So how do writers make it feel real without being, well, accurately messy, like real life?
One really important technique is free, indirect speech, or style indirect libre.
Okay, explain that one.
It's where the third-person narration sort of subtly absorbs or reflects a character's thoughts, their voice, their way of speaking, but without using quotation marks or explicit tags like she thought.
Ah, so it blends narration and character voice.
Perfectly put. Austen, Goethe, Flaubert were masters. The book uses a fantastic example from Mansfield Park where the narrator uses phrases like only, good luck, and captivate, words that seem to just drift into the narration from the general gossip and chatter of the neighborhood characters.
So it can be quite subtle.
Very. It can catch you by surprise, which is part of its power. And it's not just fiction. It can be used in biography, too. David Noakes apparently used it effectively in his Life of Samuel Johnson.
Now, some writers take the idea of letting dialogue do all the work to an extreme, don't they?
Oh, yes. Henry Green, for example, was really strict about cutting out authorial intrusion, explanation. He felt novels should have this autonomous life, and authors explaining characters just killed their vitality. He wanted the dialogue to carry almost everything.
Which is very different from many other great novelists.
Totally. Think of Eliot, James, Proust, Woolf, Roth. Their work often relies heavily on some degree of authorial presence, shaping meaning, giving context. While Green's point about not over-explaining is good, his extreme approach might lose a lot of richness.
So the goal is balance.
I think so. The ideal, as the book suggests, is for dialogue to resonate on multiple levels, carrying plot, character, and theme.
And then there's someone like Ivy Compton Burnett who's almost entirely dialogue.
She's fascinatingly extreme, isn't she? Her novels are practically just pages of clipped, formal-sounding dialogue, stripping away nearly all exposition and description.
How does that even work?
The book points out how her seemingly repetitive lines like, "So the children are not down yet?" Repeated several times at the start of a novel, actually become incredibly revealing. They expose these deep, underlying human desires and tensions in this stark, almost chillingly ordinary way.
And just the phrasing of dialogue, how it's presented, is crucial, avoiding those clunky tags.
Oh, definitely. You want to avoid dialogue that just baldly states the emotion like, gosh, I'm upset. Or what's sometimes called adverb disease.
Adverb disease.
Yeah, constantly using dramatic attribution verbs followed by adverbs. He grated harshly. She gasped breathlessly. He jerked out angrily. Even Dickens, in his early work, sometimes overdid it. Ralph Nickleby apparently growled, sneered, and snarled, all in quick succession.
Laughs a bit much. So often, just a simple he said or she said is best.
James and Conrad were masters of using simple attribution, often repeatedly, without it feeling dull. It keeps the focus on the words. Austen is incredibly subtle. She rarely uses altered wording, but when she does, like Mrs. Norris crying something in Mansfield Park, it's deliberate, injecting a specific emotional temperature.
And you don't want dialogue that just goes on and on about nothing.
No. Anthony Trollope warned against that. Letting dialogue meander too long about irrelevant things makes the reader feel cheated. Elmore Leonard is praised for his fantastic conciseness. His character Chili Palmer's line, "I won't see any more than I have to," is kind of his motto.
Though sometimes very little dialogue works too.
Right, like Peter Haig, whose protagonist in Miss Smilla's feeling for snow is much more comfortable with ice than people, so the lack of dialogue fits her character perfectly.
What about getting inside a character's head? Inner dialogue.
That brings up a really deep question, as the writer Tim Parks explores. Does thought even exist without words? And how do you capture a character's internal life, especially if they aren't naturally very articulate, without just making them sound like the highly verbal author?
That's a real challenge.
It is. David Foster Wallace was obsessed with this, focusing on capturing the authentic rhythms of speech and thought, even if it meant breaking conventional grammar rules.
So going back to the earlier point, fictional dialogue is definitely not a literal transcription of reality.
Not at all. David Lodge really emphasizes its artificiality. Henry James and Joseph Conrad even made a deliberate choice sometimes to have characters reply obliquely, not directly answering, which added tension.
There's that famous story about William James asking his brother Henry why his characters didn't talk like real people.
Yes. And Henry's supposed reply was just perfect. Maybe they should.
Laughs classic.
And characters in Roth, Proust, Tolstoy, they don't always sound exactly like people you'd overhear on the bus, but their dialogue serves the specific purpose of the story. Even Iris Murdoch, whose dialogue was sometimes criticized as unbelievable, made it work because it served her larger philosophical or dramatic aims.
We talked about repetition earlier. It can be annoying if it's just sloppy, right? But incredibly effective when it's intentional.
Oh, absolutely. Careless repetition is just weak writing. But deliberate repetition can be like a drumbeat, incredibly powerful. Think of honest echoing through Othello or time in The Great Gatsby.
Or Dickens with the fog in Bleak House.
Exactly. That relentless repetition really creates the atmosphere. And the book shares a great example from a Ross Thomas thriller,
What's that one?
where the line, "They say that I should quit my job and run," is repeated, each time with more intensity, building anticipation for the final explosive reply. It's pure dramatic effect through repetition.
And even simple sentences can carry completely different meanings just based on emphasis, can't they?
For sure. There's that famous Agatha Christie clue that hinges entirely on which word is stressed. And British police training apparently uses the sentence, "I didn't sleep with your wife." Stressing a different word each time creates 6 totally distinct meanings. It shows how much dialogue relies on nuance beyond the literal words.
Wow, it really highlights the incredible balance needed to make dialogue work, doesn't it? Balancing that feel of natural speech with the necessary artifice of fiction, balancing brevity with essential detail, showing character moving the plot.
It's a tightrope walk.
It reminds me of that image in the book, the German equilibrists, the Salambos, perfectly balanced just like dialogue needs to be.
A delicate, precise balance.
Yeah.
Absolutely essential for making the story breathe.
All right, let's shift gears to a concept that's often misunderstood, maybe even misused, but is absolutely everywhere in great literature. Irony. It's a slippery word.
It really is. But at its core, isn't irony always about that gap? That tension between the apparent meaning, what's said on the surface, and the deeper, often contradictory actual meaning.
Yeah. Julian Barnes, through a character, called it what people miss. I like that.
Me too. There's even a Bridge magazine definition quoted, "Irony is unexpected truth."
And Wikipedia's breakdown is useful too, laying out the different types.
Right, the classic ones. Verbal irony saying the opposite of what you mean.
Sarcasm's cousin.
Sort of, yeah. Dramatic irony where the audience knows something a character doesn't. Situational irony when the outcome is the opposite of what you'd expect. And cosmic irony, that sense of the universe being indifferent or even hostile to human hopes.
Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall has just a stunning example of irony in action. That scene between Cromwell and Thomas More.
Oh, it's brilliant. They're political enemies, walking in More's garden, speaking with extreme caution. And Cromwell makes this seemingly casual comment, something like, "It's not really a good year for soft fruit."
Which sounds innocent enough.
On the surface, yeah, just small talk about the weather. But it's absolutely loaded with irony. It subtly conveys Cromwell's awareness of the character flaws of More's son-in-law, Roper, which they've just been dancing around in conversation.
And Mantel underlines the danger, the subtext.
Yes, she adds that Moore looks at him out of the tail of his eye, he smiles. That tiny detail. It shows they both understand the veiled meaning, the knowledge being exchanged. In that incredibly dangerous political climate, irony allowed them to say things that, if said directly, could mean death. It's sometimes called slave irony.
So irony isn't just clever wordplay, it actively engages the reader, asks us to dig deeper, to find that hidden meaning.
Exactly. Kierkegaard had that line, let each utterance gravitate towards ironic totality. It demands that the reader twigged, that you catch on to the layers beneath.
It makes sense then maybe why Kafka used so much irony and indirection.
Possibly. And maybe why he left so many works unfinished, like The Castle. Perhaps K is never meant to reach a definitive end, so the reader stays immersed in the text's ambiguities, perpetually appreciating the irony. Kafka even begged his publisher not to put an image of the insect on the cover of the Metamorphosis.
Why not?
He said the insect itself cannot be depicted, leaving that crucial visual entirely to the reader's imagination, preserving the ambiguity.
J.D. Salinger is another master of this kind of indirection, creating powerful effects through what's not said.
Oh, absolutely. His story, A Perfect Day for a Banana Fish, is just a masterclass in tragic irony. The clues about Seymour Glass's mental state leading up to that shocking ending are incredibly minimal, almost devastatingly pared down.
So the impact comes from the gaps.
Entirely. The reader has to do the work, connect the dots, come 70% of the way, as the book quotes Coleridge. The text finds you, but you have to meet it halfway. Your effort completes the meaning, feels the weight of the irony.
It's almost ironic trying to explain irony without sounding completely flat-footed yourself.
It is. And that little cartoon captures it perfectly, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What's the right age to tell a child that she's ironic? It's funny, but it also highlights how subtle and pervasive irony can be, even in everyday life.
Okay, switching gears again. Let's get back to some fundamentals. What actually makes a story work? And how does that connect to this often debated term, plot? Are they the same thing?
Well, the book describes this great exercise from Kingston University, playing the old consequences game. You start with just bare-bones facts, like Adolf Hitler met Jane Austen near the roundabout at the fair.
Laughs. Okay, that's certainly a starting point.
Memorable, right. But then the exercise shows how when students added layers, characterization, context, causality, like maybe Hitler was fidgeting nervously, maybe Austen was blushing, maybe the meeting was late at night surrounded by punk gangs.
Right, adding the texture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And crucially, adding causality. Maybe the reason Hitler decided to invade Belgium was because Austen, who loved him, suggested it. Suddenly, that bare sequence of events transforms. It gains depth, motivation, that sense of cause and effect. It shows how adding those layers turns a simple storyline into something much more.
So the sequence of events is the story, but the cause and effect, the why, is the plot. Is that the idea?
That's E.M. Forster's classic distinction, yeah.
Mhm.
Story is just the time sequence. The king died, and then the queen died. Simple chronology. Plot adds causality. The king died, and then the queen died of grief. Forster famously wasn't a huge fan of plot, called it the good writer's last resort, almost like a cheap trick.
But not everyone agrees with him on that, surely.
Oh, far from it. Stephen King, for instance, argues there's a huge difference between them. He sees story as more honorable, organic, while plot feels shifty, something artificial you impose.
But other writers loved plot.
Definitely. You have figures like Coleridge, admiring the intricate plot of Fielding's Tom Jones. P.G. Wodehouse apparently worked from incredibly elaborate outlines, plotting everything meticulously. And Dorothy Sayers, writing detective fiction, called plot the absolute first essential. Can't have a mystery without it.
So where does the book land in this whole debate? Is it plot or story?
It suggests they're really more like two ends of a spectrum, and they're fundamentally intertwined. You gotta need both.
How so?
Well, focusing too much just on the story sequence, the what happens next, can lead to something superficial, maybe like a blockbuster movie, with lots of action but no real depth.
Okay.
But focusing too much on plot, on the mechanics of cause and effect, can lead to contrivance. Characters start acting unnaturally, just doing things to make the plot work, and you lose the audience's belief. Forster actually criticized Thomas Hardy's Jude the Obscure for making the characters serve the plot too heavily, making them feel unrealistic.
So they really need to complement each other. You can't have one without the other working well.
Pretty much. They work best together. A story, no matter how interesting the sequence of events, won't really resonate without compelling characters, as Forster himself pointed out. And both story and plot rely on adding those specific truthful details, what Ray Bradbury in Fahrenheit 451 called the pores on the face of life, the details that make the world feel real.
And sometimes just one tiny detail can completely shift a simple story into a plot, into a mystery.
That's a great point. John le Carré put it brilliantly. The cat sat on the mat is not a story, but the cat sat on the dog's mat. Ah, that's the beginning of a story.
Right.
And P.D. James had a similar thought. Everyone thought that the queen had died of grief until they discovered the puncture mark in her throat. That single detail, the puncture mark, transforms it instantly from a sad story into a plot, a mystery that needs solving.
Okay, let's talk about something maybe less tangible, but just as important. The sensory experience of reading, the sound, the rhythm, the actual feel of the language itself, what we call style.
Yeah, prose has its own music, doesn't it? It's different from verse, obviously. Aristotle noted that overt meter in prose can be distracting, although Dickens, apparently, sometimes slipped into, quote, metrical paragraphs.
Unintentionally.
Maybe sometimes, maybe not. But the key usually is for the rhythm to be unobtrusive. The book suggests that when prose becomes really passionate, it naturally tends to sort of chant.
And writers use specific techniques to give prose shape and impact, right?
Yeah.
Beyond just word choice.
Yes. Antithesis is a classic one, arranging contrasting ideas or syllables into symmetrical phrases. It makes them memorable, impactful.
Like, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times.
The prime example. Or Orwell's 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. Very effective.
Wow.
But Lucas, who's quoted in the book, warns against using it too much. It can feel artificial, or too little, where you lose the punch. He says, truth lies between opposed extremes, which is nicely put.
And just where you place words or phrases can make a huge difference, too.
Absolutely. There's an example from Francis Bacon's essay on friendship. He ends this powerful passage about the benefits of friendship with the stark phrase, where there is no love. Some critics felt it should come earlier, but placing it right at the end delivers this jolt, emphasizing the void, the core point about love's necessity.
Avoiding unwanted meter, those accidental sing-song rhythms, sounds tricky. How do writers manage that?
One way is to use consecutive unstressed syllables. It breaks up potential rhythmic patterns. Like a lot of really effective prose techniques, it tends to work best when the reader doesn't consciously notice it's happening.
And things like sound echoing sense or alliteration.
They can be effective, but they're risky. Overdoing them can feel like a cheap trick, just showing off. Alliteration especially is called perilous. Use with caution.
We talked about repetition in dialogue, but it's obviously huge in prose description, too.
Yes, again, it's often just careless writing. But when it's handled well, it can be remarkably effective. We mentioned honest in Othello, time in Gatsby. Think of the incredible accumulating repetitions in Dickens' description of the fog rolling in at the start of Bleak House. It becomes almost hypnotic.
Dickens really understood rhythm, didn't he?
He did. Apparently, drawing on his experience as a parliamentary reporter, he even suggested scoring politicians' speeches like opera to capture their cadence and impact.
And that Ross Thomas example of repetition-building drama?
Yeah, they say that I should quit my job and run, repeated with more force. They say that I should quit my job and run, building to that explosive reply. Quit hell! I've just begun to fight. Pure escalating drama through repetition.
The rhythm of the King James Bible is mentioned as a huge influence on English prose style.
Oh, massively. Its influence is almost impossible to overstate. Analysis shows these deliberate, powerful patterns of dactyls, iambuses, anapists in its sentences. It set a kind of rhythmic foundation for centuries of writers who followed.
It makes you appreciate how much thought goes into the sheer sound and feel of the words, even when you're just, reading on the train or something.
Exactly. Like that image mentioned in the book, The Commuter, reading Lady Chatterley's Lover on the London Underground the day it was finally published.
Right.
That book was hugely controversial for its subject matter, obviously, but its impact was also absolutely tied to Lawrence's distinctive, passionate, rhythmic prose style. It shows how the music of the writing itself can make even difficult or challenging topics accessible and deeply felt by a wide audience.
Speaking of challenging topics, let's maybe tackle one of the trickiest, writing about sex. The book points out it's not just about erotica or pornography, but about how intimacy is conveyed to serve the story, illuminate character, develop themes.
And it's notoriously difficult to do well, isn't it? How sex is depicted in literature has always been shaped by things like censorship, prevailing fashions, societal obsessions at the time.
Different cultures handle it differently, too.
Yet George Steiner made an interesting point about how different languages draw taboo lines differently. And even things like the natural pacing and breath control within a language can subtly affect how intimacy gets written about literarily. It's complex.
And readers have such incredibly varied reactions, what one person finds moving.
Another finds completely embarrassing or just awkward. Yeah. The book mentions that famous or infamous example of Monica Lewinsky giving Bill Clinton a copy of Nicholson Baker's novel Vox.
which is explicitly about phone sex.
Exactly. It just highlights how personal and varied reader reactions can be to depictions of intimacy.
And there are even awards for the worst attempts, right? The
Yeah.
Bad Sex Awards.
Chuckles. Yes, the Bad Sex and Fiction Awards from the Literary Review. They're quite well known. Apparently, it's even whispered that some authors deliberately write over-the-top scenes hoping to get shortlisted, which kind of blurs the line between a serious attempt and self-parody. The book cited a Tom Wolfe example that apparently managed to be neither erotic nor funny, just fell flat.
Nabokov had a specific term for sex scenes that felt forced or just there because the author felt they had to be.
He did. He called them the obligatory sex scene, or OSS. He described it as a depressing scenario. It points to that pressure writers might feel, maybe for commercial reasons, to include sex scenes, or perhaps just their failure when they genuinely try their best to write them well.
It's always been a fraught topic.
Definitely. The Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, the National Library, even has a special restricted section just for erotic literature called L'Enfer.
Which means hell.
Exactly. Tells you something about historical attitudes.
There's that amazing anecdote about Shirley Conran hiring someone specifically to write the sex scenes for her huge bestseller, Lace.
Yes. She hired Celia Brayfield to create, I think there's 12, distinct erotic scenes. And apparently Conran had some unusual requests involving things like a goldfish and a diamond. Brayfield later said she felt existing literature didn't offer much help beyond actual pornography or tiny collections of erotica, which is interesting because it contrasts with the book's underlying belief that past literature does actually offer insights into conveying intimacy effectively if you look beyond the explicit.
So if you're not being explicit, how do you convey that sense of intimacy effectively? Through suggestion.
Subtlety can be incredibly powerful. The book uses a wonderful example from George Eliot describing Mrs. Tulliver with her household keys, drawing out one specific key, smiling at the fire. It's a small domestic detail, but it subtly implies this quiet anticipation of intimacy with her husband later that evening. It's all suggestion.
Thomas Hardy seemed to be in constant battle over this kind of thing, suggestion versus explicitness.
Oh, he fought constantly with editors and the guardians of public propriety. Leslie Stephen, his editor for Far From the Madding Crowd, made him censor passages and explicitly told Hardy he had to treat the seduction of Fanny Robin in a gingerly fashion, while admitting the prudery was excessive.
And his later novels, like Tess, were even more controversial.
Hugely. Tess of D'Urbervilles was initially rejected by several magazines for being too explicit, having improper explicitness and too much succulence, whatever that meant.
So he had to cut things.
Significant sections. He had to substitute a mock marriage ceremony for the actual seduction scene in the woods. He wasn't allowed to print the scene where Tess baptizes her dying baby. And an editor even suggested that instead of Angel Clare carrying the milkmaids across a flooded lane, a scene with his own subtle erotic charge, he should use a wheelbarrow.
A wheelbarrow? Seriously?
Apparently so. Hardy couldn't even understand why people objected to a scene mentioning a blood-stained ceiling. The sensitivities were just baffling to him sometimes.
It's fascinating to contrast that need for subtle suggestion back then with a more explicit passage, like the one quoted from Lady Chatterley's Lover.
Right. That passage focuses entirely on the physical sensations, the direct details, the hand groping, drawing down the silk, the tremor of pleasure, touching the warm body, the navel. It's a completely different approach, direct, sensory, explicit, compared to Eliot's symbolic keys.
A New York Times book review piece years ago specifically asked why writing about sex is so hard.
Yeah, and Nicholson Baker offered this very specific, maybe idiosyncratic list of elements he felt were key. Thwartedness, surprise, innocence, and hair.
Hair, okay.
But Sheila Heti made what feels like a really crucial point. A good sex scene isn't just about the sex. It's fundamentally about the character in that specific moment. And more broadly, sex and sexuality need to be woven into the fabric of the entire book. You can't just parachute in a sex scene and expect it to work well if you don't fundamentally believe it's a significant part of life and your character's experience.
It really highlights how easily it can go wrong, though. How you can write something that just feels awkward or unsexy or completely unbelievable. The book gives examples of dialogue that just fall totally flat in that context.
It absolutely does. It takes honesty, courage, and real skill, real craft to write well about intimacy and desire. It's not easy.
Okay, so let's say the first draft is finally done. But that's often only the beginning, isn't it? Now comes that crucial, often incredibly difficult second act, revision.
Oh, it's absolutely central. And it's fascinating just how much great writers revised. Jane Austen, for instance, her drafts show heavy scoring through lots of small but incredibly effective changes. She even undertook a major rewrite of the final crucial chapters of Persuasion.
And Tolstoy sounds like he was legendary for his revision process.
Absolute relentless.
Yeah.
There are reports of, 9 different versions of the Kreutzer Sonata. His wife, Sophia, famously copied out War and Peace by hand 7 times from beginning to end. And Tolstoy himself produced dozens and dozens of drafts for various sections. It was endless.
Balzac sounds like he drove his printers completely insane.
The apples. His revision process was notoriously intense. Yeah, he'd get the proofs back and just cover them with additions, deletions, notes, scraps of paper pinned on. Apparently, it drove the typesetters to absolute despair.
Mark Twain had a funny piece of advice about revision involving swear words.
Right. He suggested substituting the word damn every time you feel tempted to write the word very. His logic was your editor would just delete all the damns, and the writing would be exactly as it should be, leaner and stronger.
Laughs. That's practical.
Spike Milligan, too, coming from his Army background, used expletives pretty liberally. Martin Amis described his use of fucking as effective impacted repetition, though he also noted it could quickly become tiresome. Norman Mailer even reportedly repeated words like shit many times in drafts, hoping his editors would leave at least some of them in.
And Henry James even went back and revised his own published work years later.
Yes. He revisited Portrait of a Lady something like 25 years after it first came out. The book notes his revisions often go one skin deeper, sometimes making the language sound almost estranged, unfamiliar, but also somehow more determined, more defiant. It's fascinating.
So revision is this really delicate balancing act, then?
It truly is. It's about avoiding being too voulu, too willed, too obviously crafted, where you see the effort versus finding the absolute right word, the perfect rhythm. It's about saying enough but not too much, and making sure the reader focuses on the song, not the singer, as the saying goes.
And a huge part of that balance is knowing what to leave out. Omission.
Hugely important. Hemingway famously said he left out half of what he wrote. Chekhov's most famous advice to writers was simply cut, cut, cut. P.G. Wodehouse described building his intricate plots like a coral reef, adding tiny layers meticulously, always focused on adding color and avoiding any flatness.
It's interesting that the book brings in neuropsychiatry here, talking about brain functions.
Yeah, it suggests that the creative writing part of the brain might actually be different from the analytical editing part, which implies that not every great writer is necessarily a great editor of their own work. They might need that external eye.
Which maybe connects to that feeling of dissatisfaction many writers have.
Could be. Chekhov called dissatisfaction a cornerstone of every real talent, that necessary itch. But he also acknowledged it can be destructive, leading to writer's block or even destroying manuscripts, like William Carlos Williams reportedly tearing up a manuscript in frustration.
Though his wife saved it.
Famously rescued the fragments from the bin, yes.
So accepting criticism from someone else, like an editor, must be incredibly difficult for many writers.
Oh, hugely. Many struggled intensely. Nabokov famously called editors pompous avuncular brutes. Thomas Mann and Anthony Trollope both requested cuts, quite forcefully. George Bernard Shaw wrote a furious letter to the Times about an editor who dared to change his punctuation.
So how do good editors navigate that minefield? It must require incredible tact.
Immense tact, yes, but also honesty. Kurt Vonnegut apparently sent a friend detailed suggestions, but told him to only use what rang a bell, keeping the ultimate control with the author. Evelyn Waugh, maybe a bit less tactful but brutally honest, told Nancy Mitford that revision, though painful, must be done con amore with love for the work itself, not just the author's feelings.
And there's that persistent myth about some writers, like Kerouac, just pouring out genius onto the page with no revision at all.
Right, the legend of On the Road being written in one spontaneous 3-week burst on a single scroll of paper. But as Joyce Johnson, who knew him well, recounted, he actually spent years working on drafts and notes before that famous typing session. He just thought admitting to revision wasn't cool, wasn't part of the beat image. The myth served a purpose.
Some editor-author relationships became legendary, really shaping careers.
Maxwell Perkins and Thomas Wolfe is the classic example. Wolfe apparently found revision absolute hell, but Perkins relentlessly stressed its importance, the need for shaping and revising. While Wolfe was initially incredibly grateful, he later grew resentful of Perkins's influence, switched publishers, and the book rather bluntly notes he never wrote so well again after leaving Perkins.
Wow. And sometimes the editor's impact can be so dramatic it's almost like co-authorship, sometimes quite controversially.
The Gordon Lish and Raymond Carver relationship is perhaps the most extreme and debated example. Lish drastically cut and reshaped Carver's stories, arguably creating that signature minimalist style Carver became famous for. He changed titles, cut entire sections, removed redemptive endings.
Which Carver wasn't happy about later.
No. While it defined Carver's early reputation, Carver later expressed real distress about the extent of the changes, particularly to stories like A Small Good Thing, and eventually decided to publish his original, longer, more hopeful versions under the title Beginners. It raises huge questions about authorship and editing.
But it can also be a truly positive collaborative relationship, right? Where the editor helps the author achieve their vision.
Absolutely. Charles Monteith and William Golding working together on Lord of the Flies is presented as a fantastic counterpoint. Monteith spotted both minor flaws, commas, misspellings, and larger structural issues in Golding's original manuscript, which was called Strangers from Within.
And Golding was receptive.
Apparently incredibly so. He agreed to revise enthusiastically, calling it necessary cleaning up process. He accepted criticisms, even agreeing to tone down the portrayal of Simon and his almost mystical connection to the divine, even though Golding himself wanted a full-blown theophany. Monteith saw what Golding was aiming for and helped him find better, clearer ways to achieve it, resulting in a much stronger novel.
That whole complex dynamic, that back and forth, sometimes tension-filled relationship is captured really well in that little cartoon, isn't it?
Well,
I'll call you back later, okay? I'm having dinner with my editor.
laughs. It hints at the intensity. And just thinking about revision, even something as fundamental as the title often changes dramatically. That footnote listing original titles for famous novels is fascinating.
Like Pride and Prejudice starting as First Impressions.
Exactly. Or Lord of the Flies almost being called Nightmare Island. It just shows how much revision at every level goes into making a finished book.
Finally, let's talk about the very end of the story. Endings. There seems to be this strong, almost primal, readerly desire for a happy, clear conclusion, doesn't there?
Oh, absolutely. Trollope said he wanted the end of a novel to be like a children's dinner party, all sweetmeats and sugar plums. And Miss Prism in Oscar Wilde's. The importance of being earnest perfectly nails the Victorian ideal. The good ended happily and the bad unhappily. That is what fiction means. They loved a neat wind-up.
But the modern novel often resists that kind of neatness, doesn't it?
It often does. Henry James really pioneered the more ambiguous, open ending, sometimes just cutting off mid-conversation. His ending for The Ambassadors, and there we are, is famously abrupt. David Foster Wallace pushed it even further, ending his first novel, The Broom and the System, literally mid-sentence.
Which can feel unsatisfying to some readers.
It can. It might be a deliberate reaction against those demands for overly neat, brilliantly theatrical closures. A refusal to tie everything up with a bow.
Achieving that sense of resolution, even if it's not a perfectly happy one, must be incredibly difficult for writers.
George Eliot certainly admitted struggling with endings. She felt the conclusion to The Mill on the Floss, The Flood, wasn't quite right, maybe too melodramatic. She called conclusions generally, at best, a negation. And her anxiety about wrapping up the huge canvas of Middlemarch even led her to add that finale section, basically listing the fates of all the main characters, almost like modern movie credits rolling.
And sometimes writers actually change their planned endings based on feedback.
Dickens is the most famous example there, with great expectations. His original ending had Pip encountering Estella years later, both changed, saddened, parting again. He revised it to a more conventional, more hopeful reunion, reportedly after his friend Edward Bulwer-Lytton suggested the original was too bleak for readers.
Shakespeare's endings, too, can sometimes feel a bit quick after all the preceding drama.
They often restore order, yes, but can feel slightly anticlimactic after the intensity of the main conflict. The book notes that cultural expectations back then, the groundlings in the audience maybe wanting clear resolution, maybe even body counts, definitely shaped how plays ended.
True.
It also makes the point that the enduring power of a novel like Pride and Prejudice relies absolutely on its specific structure and that delayed resolution. If Darcy had declared his love and been accepted on page 50, it just wouldn't be the same story at all.
My old English teacher had very simple advice for essay endings.
Oh yeah, what was that?
Don't just summarize what you've already said. Just stop when you've finished making your point. Find that perfect final note.
That idea of the perfect ending being a kind of cathartic discharge.
Oh,
Stop.
to that. Well, we have certainly taken a very deep dive today. We've journeyed through so many layers of the writer's craft, haven't we? From creating characters that feel utterly real, controlling what we see through perspective and distance, making dialogue truly sing, using irony to add those crucial layers of depth.
understanding that dance between story and plot, appreciating the actual music of prose, tackling difficult subjects like intimacy, and really getting into that often hidden, sometimes painful, but absolutely vital process of revision and working with editors.
It really brings home that the magic we talked about at the start. It isn't just some innate mystical talent. So much of it is this painstaking, deliberate craft, all those techniques behind the lunder. It really is the secret in the bottle. And hopefully for you listening, understanding these techniques changes how you read, how you appreciate stories. Now, when you pick up a book or watch a film or even listen to someone tell a story, maybe think about it. How does focusing on the specific details that build a character, or noticing the narrative distance the author chooses, or spotting the layers of irony at play, how does knowing about the impact of revision and editors, how does all that affect how you see the stories around you? Does it change how you think about communication, even in your own life?
And maybe a final thought to leave you with. We talked about authors grappling for control versus characters seeming to take over, and that vital, sometimes reshaping role of editors. If writing is this complex collaborative journey involving the author, the editor, the characters themselves, and ultimately even the reader who really gets the final word on what a story means, and how much is deliberately left open, unfinished perhaps, like Kafka's Castle or Salinger's devastatingly pared down irony, how much is left for you, the reader, to discover and complete in your own reading?